Okay. Hi, my name is Cazahous, and today I'm going to be talking about the ranks and titles of women in the Korean court during the Joseon Dynasty. Before we begin, it is important to note that these ranks and titles that I will be giving today are specifically in regards to the king's court. It differed greatly depending on whether or not you lived in the prince's court or the princess dowager, etc. So for example, if you were a 7A rank in the king's court and you went to the princess court and you met a 7A woman, you would be ranked above her simply because you were in the king's court. Additionally, while I think it is also pertinent that we mention those who are not ranked, those include slaves, servants, and maids. The term for the slave during this time, or for palace women, was musuri, and it meant a woman, the girl who fetches water. And however, it was not limited to just fetching water. They were given the rough work, those such as getting firewood and creating fires. Those are all jobs that would be under the slaves. And another thing is, before 1411, these women were required to live outside of the palace. So it would just be like a job. In the morning they would come and they would just do their duties, and then at the end of the day they would come home and then they would just be out of the court. However, in 1411, because of a lot of personal information with the king's court was leaving, the king wanted these affairs to stay within the palace, so they required that these slaves and servants be living in the palace. However, there were occasions where they would leave the court temporarily to go get errands or medicine or herbs, whatever. They would be allowed to leave the court, which makes them greatly different from all ranking palace women who were not allowed to ever leave the court upon their entry, except in the case of death or dying. The background and education of, I'll explain later. The background and education of the gunyo, which were the palace women, this usually occurred once every 10 years, and there were occasions that it would happen more frequently, but girls would be admitted to the palace and they would undergo rigorous training, and at the end of this training, it's a period of a couple months, an older asamgun or a higher ranked woman would choose her to take her under her wing, and so if that happened, then you would be in the palace. But there were occasions where some of the girls who entered the palace would be forced to leave because they weren't accepted. And interestingly enough, when they first entered the palace, most of the girls were typically 12 to 13 years of age. However, depending on what department they were recruiting for, you could go as young as 5 years of age. So for example, if you were working in the embroidery or sewing department, because they considered it a fine skill that needed a lot longer to practice than cooking, you would enter the court 4 to 5 years of age and just undergo your training period from the age of 4 to 13. But what they would do is, when you would enter the palace, you would stand up and you would take a test. It's called the Kumsa Mitan, and it's a virginity test because these were the king's women, because they lived in the king's court, they needed to be pure. And so there was a story about a bird, like a dove or something, that was symbolized of a former Funyo, and she had sexual affairs with a man and she died. And so they say that her essence is reincarnated into these birds. And so what they would do is they would hold out their arms and they would place a drip of a little plop of blood on them, and if it rolled onto either side, that meant that you were not pure and you were not a virgin, and therefore you were not admitted into the palace. I don't know how frequently that happened, but that was one way to test your virginity. Additionally, though, you went through rigorous training aside from your duties in whatever department, whether it be cooking or medicine. You underwent learning of the court language, and the court language was called gunche. And